die, son, you gotta work late. Sometimes I wonder, but I'm...
The rock on the line is the road to ride, yeah, the rock on the line is the mighty good road, and if you want to ride it, gotta ride it like a find it, get your ticket at the station on the rock on the line.
See the girl with the red vest on, she can burn Atlanta all night long, alright. She's alright. She's alright. What would you do if I sang out of tune? Would you stand up and walk out on me? Lend me your ears and I'll sing you a song. I will try not to sing out of tune. I wanna get by with my friend. I just keep trying with my friend. I wanna get out with my friend. I just hold on. Going this way, you need your friends along.
He's one of the most gifted singers that England's ever produced.
To help you make it day and night.
Believe it or not, to me, Joe gets a better singer through the years, especially right now. His voice, it's always been good, but something about his voice now really hits me deeper than it ever did. Right?
I've kept it inside much too long. There's no relief. Carried it around just like a stone. Too heavy for me. I'll pay the price. Standing on the outside, looking in. It's time to let healing begin.
When he was young, he seemed popular with his schoolmates, and he was one of those boys who seemed to always be leading the others. When we went away on holiday, he'd get something while he was there, and he'd stick to this. We went to one place, there was a man doing some diving act, and you could see it from the sands, and he used to go and watch this every day. As soon as he came back, he was on the front wall doing this for the benefit of all the children in the neighbourhood. They all used to come, his back.
I just remember I had a good time growing up. You know, we lived on the edge, just close to Derbyshire, just next door. I mean, on a bicycle ride away. Very like half country existence and half town kind of atmosphere. And I just remember things like getting, you know, a scooter, and my dad making me a box car, you know, whatever you could call those things, soapbox kind of thing, you know. Just, it was a good father. I mean, my dad, Harold, and you know, but he was never the kind of guy to take me fishing or anything, you know.
There was a boy who lived across the road called John Mitchell. He was a friend of John's. And they both used to call one another Joe for some reason that I never understood. They were both named John, but they called one another Joe. And although this boy reverted to his normal name, it stuck with our John, and he's remained Joe ever since.
As a kid, that's how I got the nickname Joe. It was Cowboy Joe, because I was always obsessed by that sort of, you know, cowboy culture.
Because I'm about 3.5 years older than Joe, and he was little brother initially, and then we both went to the same school. Joe was an extrovert, and as I was getting to the top of the school and he came in, I used to hear him at break times as they let the younger children out. There'd be this tremendous roar. Joe was first into the playground.
At Sunday school I used to attend, I did All Things Bright and Beautiful, and the teacher sort of picked me out of the class of like 20 kids. He said, "Oh, you have such a lovely voice, you know, would you do this solo for us?" And it never occurred to me, you know, I mean, music was like an awakening for me. So it was almost like my childhood. I was just, you know, dormant, waiting for what was to be. About 3 or 4 years ago, we played a gig in Telluride down the road a piece. So we came up here and spent like 2 weeks looking for real estate all over Colorado. And this was the last place we came to. When you think of all the years of touring I've done, and what I do love is, I mean, what you've got here is some clean air, and it's very quiet, because I get enough noise the rest of it, you know. I could have well have settled in England back then, but it's just the fact that I've been in the States so many years, and I pay my income tax here and everything. You know, it would be a hell of an upheaval to move back.
Well, the whole of the 50s was a tremendously exciting period musically. The rock and roll was just taking off. And then, of course, skiffle came along.
Down the rock on the line, they keep the mighty good road. Well, the rock on the line is the road to ride. Yeah, the rock on the line is the mighty good road. And if you want to ride it, got to ride it like a fighter. Get your ticket at the station on the rock on the line.
About 13 years of age, and I was sat on the carpet in front of the radio. And out of nowhere, just these simple A chords, you know, on an acoustic guitar. This is the story about the rock album line. And my ears pricked up. I just got so excited by the time he picked up the rhythm and the end of it. And then my voice hadn't broken, you know, because Lonnie had a very high key. So I used to be able to sing along perfectly with him till I was about 13 and a half, and then suddenly, boom.
I was involved in a band called the Headlanders. And they picked up on the fact that Joe had got a good voice. I don't know how they found that out, but they did, and they invited him up to sing with us. And I think that's when he got his debut, really, singing, and he started getting a taste for it.
Well, my father was a singer.
A beeswinger.
A baritone singer in the old ballad songs of the Victorian days. And whether that's come out again in another form, I don't know. I always liked tenor singers. I used to sing for my own amusement, that's all. I was very shy, and so I never thought of going in for anything like that.
I got a feeling once my ears woken to rhythm and blues, which eventually it would become, that was what I wanted to be, a singer, yeah, a beeswinger.
I can hear the river, I can see the water, I don't feel so lonely when I'm in the river. On a night like tonight in the park, I sit alone out in the dark. Only days separate me from you. It seems I was the month's breakthrough.
He went to the, what they call the technical school, and he was trained in building trade. But he never seemed to take very much interest. And eventually I found out that he was playing truant.
I always remember somebody asked me what I wanted to do, and I said I wanted to be a DJ. And if you remember, like back then, there was the only kind of DJs, you had to have like an Oxford accent and, you know, like sort of degrees, and I mean, there was no kind of commercial DJs. So people laughed at me, you know. But in the end, it was my dad who got me, you know, suggested I, you know, go to the gas board, and because I really didn't know, I had no music, even then was sort of rooted in the back. I knew eventually that was where I was going to be.
When I went off to university, I started listening to big bands and jazz and Frank Sinatra. And meanwhile, he got into Ray Charles and the deep blues.
When I discovered Ray Charles and got really heavy into blues, I sort of lost all my friends. They thought I'd sort of lost it, you know. But one night, an aficionado like myself, who used to always refer to records by their serial numbers, he never even spoke about like him, and he called me and said, "Joe, Chess 59734 has arrived, if you're interested." So I took a bus across Sheffield to go to Tinsley, which is way across town, and you know, at 2 in the morning, and he got a brand new copy of Muddy Waters, you know, the freak. I mean, you know, I got home, put it on full volume at 3 in the morning, and I remember my dad coming down the stairs, you know, that, what the hell? Yeah, my father always had great terms. When he first heard Ray, he said he sounds like he's got a pin stuck up his arse.
See the girl with the diamond ring. She knows how to shake that thing. No, she's all right now.
Ray was he was the blues gospel connection. I mean, you know, you can accredit it to other people at the same time, but he really was the you know, pre-Motown. He was the man who welded the two things together.
Well, in the early days, Joe put together a group called the Cavaliers, and they were just learning, and they used to pick up on numbers which people like Johnny Kidd and the Pirates did.
But I remember the first gig we did at the youth club, and we had like about 6 guitars at the time, all acoustic. And we were doing like Johnny Be Good and Blue Moon, you know, the standards. And we actually had to pay to get in to play.
Originally, he was a drummer, and they couldn't get a singer, so he took over the singing, and somebody else took over the drums. And he went from there.
Back then, you always wanted a good-looking guy to be the singer. So we got a good-looking guy, but that's all he was. He couldn't sing with, you know, anything. So eventually the band asked me to, you know, to be the front man, because it was, as I say, it was just too difficult to be able to play. I used to get so worked up that it used to be very difficult to play and sing at the same time. Well, Sheffield, I mean, it was really funky back, you know, the steel industry, which is no longer there. I mean, when I go back to Sheffield now, it freaks me out how the industrial part of the town went. But we used to play in the city centre to a lot of hard cases.
Well, right through dawn to get you there, the telephone will hello there.
Vance Arnold and the Avengers. I gave myself the name Vance Arnold, which I think Elvis in one of his movies had the name Vance, right? And I took Arnold from Eddie Arnold, the country guy. And for years I used to deny that I'd had anything to do with it. But I used to think it was funny that when I was a gas fitter and I'd go around Sheffield and these women would used to say, "Good morning, Vance," you know, and I'd come to fit the gas fire, right, you know. "Ooh, Vance put our fire in," you know. Strange.
Right on, Jolie, right on.
Of course, they used to practice in the evening and bring the amplifiers in here and the other instruments. And I used to retreat to the front room there. And my wife went out a great deal, so she didn't notice it too much. Our neighbour was out every night, so she never complained anyway. And we got by quite well that way.
Right on, Jolie, right on. Oh, right on, Jolie, gotta run.
We got an audition to go to London, to Decca, with a guy called Mike Leander as producer. I went in and I recorded Georgia on My Mind. And I played it to the board of directors and they hated it. So I drove down to London again 2 days later and we did a Rush cover version of I'll Cry Instead, which was a Lennon-McCartney composition. And it died a death, and I died a death, right? I'd left the gas board. They told me I could go back and get the job if I wanted. But my pride or whatever was too hurt. I couldn't deal with going back there, you know.
If I could get my way, I'd get myself locked up today, but I can't, so I'll cry instead.
I'm glad in a way that things didn't turn out well at that time, because I don't think my mind was in a place to really, you know, have known how to deal with it.
Joe was the Grease band, and I was in a sort of rival band in Sheffield. Joe was doing the blues and all the funky stuff and a lot of black stuff, and I was in a band that was doing really pop, Cliff Richard and the Shadows, and I didn't like what I'd been doing in the past. The music was a bit lightweight for me, and I loved what Joe was doing. I used to go and see him at the pubs in Sheffield. I thought I'd love to play stuff like that, you know, and so as soon as I met him, that was it.
You know, it was strange that our paths had never crossed all those years. We'd lived in the same town, but until 1967, when we both could feel the twilight. If we didn't do something fast, we were going to get lost, you know. That's when we started writing songs together.
There was an English disc jockey called Tony Hull, and he'd, on his radio program, he'd sort of asked guys to send in tapes of what they were doing, and I guess he must have gone through them all. Anyway, he came with 3 or 4, and in them was this song called Margarine, a little sort of homemade demo, but it was being put together in a really sort of intriguing way. And the voice was sort of pretty indistinct, but it was just part of the whole. And so I liked it, and I think we contacted Joe or Chris, I can't remember how it came down, and asked them to come up to London.
Yeah, and he was sort of, he was flying high on Procol Harum at the time. He got some #1 hits, and he was the hot producer of the moment.
Chris sort of came in sort of looking sort of eccentrically sort of dressed in the style of the time, and I remember he had this sort of suit made out of quite bright curtain material, and it had sort of long fringes all the way down and thing, and which was, you know, sort of, it worked into the general thing. And Joe came in sort of old workman's dungarees and a sort of donkey jacket. I mean, he looked literally as if he'd just finished laying some gas pipes or something. I mean, he just didn't look like everybody else looked at all.
I remember, you know, we go down there and we must have totally freaked Denny out.
We went into the studio and we laid down the backing tracks first, and I think we had Jimmy Page on guitar and Chris Stainton played piano and bass, and I think Clem Catini played drums, and then we finished the little track, and that sounded great. And the time came for Joe to sing it. And I was saying to myself, well, I hope this guy can cut it because the track sounded good. And he opened his mouth and we could not believe it. It was this sort of, I mean, we all, of course, immediately thought of Ray Charles. You know, had this deep, really tuneful, beautifully expressive, rich, soulful voice. We just looked around at each other and went, what?
Each time I go to town, I'll see your face in the crowd. Oh, and when I come back home, I'll call your name out loud. Calling Marjorie.
The record came out, and it did all right. It sort of crept in the bottom end of the chart. Our real objective was to try and conquer America, and we thought that if we just kept it to sort of bluesy things, which he was very keen on doing, maybe he'd be overlooked by America. And we thought the real way to try and hook the American audience was to do a couple of well-known covers so they could see really what a great voice he was.
I you know, I've always loved, again, Ray Charles' influence, but 3/4 waltz, slow blues. And I was thinking, well, wouldn't it be good to do a modern kind of song in that kind of treatment? And for some odd reason, I thought of Little Help from My Friends, and I was sat on the outside toilet in Tasker Road, you know, with my pants down by my knees, whether that... I don't know why that should have given me any inspiration, but... And I just thought, well, it's such an odd song. But then, of course, I mean, it was actually, you know, I mean, just the thread of an idea. But with Tommy Eyre and Chris Stainton, I mean, Tommy put that brilliant bit of organ on the front. And then, of course, I envisioned the vocal parts, and it became quite, you know, quite an epic for the time we'd done.
What would you do if I sang out of tune? Will you stand up and walk out on me? Lend me your ears and I'll sing you a song. I will try not to sing out of key. Oh, baby.
It wasn't the easiest tune to do, and Joe's band at the time was they were fine on sort of the live stuff. But if we were going to cut this record, and I tried cutting with them before, and they were difficult to record with, so I assembled a band that I thought could cut it, and we went into the studio, and it didn't work. And I remember going home in tears. I mean, actually blubbing like a baby because it failed, and. Anyway, my wife said, well, you'll just have to do it again, won't you? And I said, you're right. So I got a whole bunch of new players in, went into the same studio, I think it was literally the next day, and Jimmy Page was on guitar, and B.J. Wilson from Procol Harum was on drums. And they really sort of gave the record, I thought, that extra dimension.
Yeah, I got a telegram. I mean, I never thought in those days, from the Beatles, congratulating me on the record getting to #1 in England. But the thing I did hear through the back doors was that it flipped him out.
So we phoned up, sort of really hustling for songs, and George Harrison said, come in, and he had something. So he played us one, and we said, not that one. He played us another, we said, not that one. And so he looked at us a bit strange. He said, well, I've got this one, but I don't know if I want to give it to you. And he played something. We said, yep, that's the one. So he grudgingly gave it to us, and then Paul McCartney walked in. And we told him what we were doing. He said, oh, I've got a song for you. So he played us, She Came In Through the Bathroom Window. We said, right, we'll have that one too.
Came in through the bathroom window. Left it by a silver spoon. And now she sucks the thumb with wonder. By the banks of an old lagoon. It always been an answer.
At the time, it didn't change him at all. He was the same guy. It was, almost as if you were gone to the fair and you'd taken a shy at the coconuts and you'd knocked all 12 down. Well, that's how it was. What's next, you know? But I think, on reflection, how it changed him in the long run was that one and all started coming out of the woodwork. And he was a guy who could not say no. So
at the time, we had a regular stint at the Marquee in Water Street. And that's when this little fat bloke came walking in the dressing room and said, how'd you like to go to the States, Joe? It was D. Anthony. And he said, $2,000 a night. So you imagine, in England, we were, even with the #1, we were probably getting like £500 just going around, playing the country clubs and stuff. So it was almost like a saving grace, really, that there was somewhere else to move on to.
Riding along in the sand, paper Cadillac, yeah.
Well, like Los Angeles was my first taste of America. And I came over and just, without Chris, I just came over and, Denny's idea to work out with some American musicians. And we did, I remember Carol Kay being on bass, a female bass player. Paul Humphreys on drums. And, I mean, it's a good band. And we did Feeling All Right, which was kind of a minor hit.
Seems I've got to have a chance I see. Every night I have strange as dream. You're present by the way. Could have been left you on my own. Oh, so it seems I've got to leave before I start to scream. But someone locked the door and cut the key. Feeling all right. I'm not feeling that good myself.
I used to sort of, you know, emulate Ray's kind of movements. And it used to freak people out. I did the Ed Sullivan Show, you know, which probably one of the last English bands to do it. And they blocked me out so that they surrounded me with girls so that they couldn't see what they called my spastic motions, you know, which made me very self-conscious about that.
But we were astounded because we weren't quite sure what he was doing with it. He was playing this phantom guitar or what it was, but then I suddenly realized, it didn't take very long to realize that it wasn't a show. That's what he needed to do to get it out.
I have a woman love who is always around when I lost my money. She put me down, talking about her time. You know it was her. Who knows better than I?
I think it's a lot of what he does is almost like implication. I think that's a clever thing. It's you know what he's trying to do. He doesn't often get, you know, like when he goes for the falsetto things and and those sort of silent screams. You can see that he's putting himself through torture and it's not coming out. So you have to almost like imagine what the note's going to be. If it doesn't actually it doesn't appear, then you know what it should be, and that's as good as actually singing it in a way. It's a unique thing he's got.
But also like the deranged conductor sort of look, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, you know. You can't fake singing like that, you know what I mean? You can't fake losing yourself, you know what I mean? You can't just say, I'm gonna go pretend to be a soul singer. You got guys like Michael Bolton, man. That guy ain't singing nothing, man. You know, that guy ain't no soul singer, man. You know what I'm saying? I don't think, you know what I mean? I mean, I don't think Joe probably is as, like, you know, as crazed about it as he was, you know, 25 years ago. I mean, you know, I should hope not, man. You know what I mean? It would injure somebody.
Well, he came to us through an arrangement we had with Denny, which we had made in 1967, I believe, where we had an exclusive production sort of situation with everything that Denny came in contact with. We needed very much to at least give A&M the image of being a rock and roll label. And the artist that we threw pretty much of everything behind to accomplish that was Joe.
I remember doing Chicago, Detroit, and getting a fantastic... Detroit, we got a fantastic reception. The crowd almost stormed the stage when we did Little Help from Our Friends. I couldn't believe it, you know.
It seemed strange at the time, but we knew we were leading up to something as we progressed through that year. And sure enough.
I was in the Bahamas. I'd gone to visit Chris Blackwell there, and one afternoon we were in the casino gambling, and there was a terrific furore going over at a craps table, so I went over to see what the action was, and there was this guy who could loosely be described as a hippie, winning stacks and stacks and stacks of money. And he came away with this money, and as he walked by me, he says, "Hey, how you doing? Don't I know you?" Well, I didn't think I'd ever seen him before in my life. I said, "Yeah, how you doing?" So we went off, and he cashed his chips in, and I don't know, he had 17 grand or something phenomenal. And we went off and had a drink, and we chatted, and he asked me what I did, and I told him what I was doing. I was involved with Joe, and he said how much, and what he was doing was putting on this concert, which turned out to be Woodstock.
I mean, D'Antoni sort of gave us a clue. We got to New York, and he said there's this festival going on, you know, upstate, and the traffic can't get through or nothing. You're going to have to be helicoptered in there. So we just presumed it was going to be, I mean, the Atlanta was like 70,000 people, which you can imagine after playing pubs in Sheffield and stuff, it was, you know, I didn't think things could get much bigger than that.
On Woodstock, I'd taken because everyone was taking everything, acid everywhere, you know. So I'd taken 2 tablets of orange sunshine, which is LSD. I thought, I'll take this. What's this going to do, you know?
Everybody piled into the chopper, and we flew into Woodstock at about 7 o'clock in the morning, just as dawn was rising.
And all the helicopters started sort of going, breathing and everything. And I suddenly started feeling very sick.
And this whole steaming mass of humanity was just waking up.
The guy opened the trapdoor in the helicopter, and I threw up through the helicopter over the Woodstock crowd.
We flew over the river, and there was about 400 naked people in the river splashing about. It just had this incredible sort of vibe to it.
So I vomited on Woodstock.
When I saw the movie, I was quite impressed how thin I'd got. That's, you know, even now I can't believe it when I look back. And, but you know, I mean, the thing that impressed me about it was the stage. It was like a carpentry and joinery job, you know, it was really a solid stage.
As it shows in the movie, the storm came down and it all got pretty hairy. And people were running around backstage going, "Cock is a jinx, cock is a jinx." I remember that very vividly. But we got through the set and we rushed back on the helicopters and out of there.
And he just went off the screen for a while. And I didn't think anything strange of it. I was doing other stuff. I think I was doing the Procol Harum album or something. And the next thing I heard was, I got this telephone call from D'Antoni saying, "Where's Joe? Where's Joe?" And I said, "I don't know, Jamaica or somewhere." He said, "Well, he's meant to be starting a tour in 6 days' time." And I said, "Well, who's playing with him?" He said, "Well," I said, "Well, haven't you heard that the Grease band was disbanded about 4 weeks ago?" And then Joe coincidentally showed up the next day in Hollywood, and I told him all this. He said, "Oh, I'm not going to do it." So I said, "Well, that's all right, you know." We phoned D'Antoni up. So we phoned D'Antoni up, and he got really upset about it. And anyway, the next day, there was D'Antoni in person with the dictum that if Joe didn't fulfill this tour, you know, he'd be sued left, right, and center. The musicians' union would ban him. He'd never play in America again, which of course put the fear of life into both of us, especially Joe, because that's really where he wanted to play more than anywhere else. So that's really how Mad Dogs and Englishmen came about.
Well, with the Grease band, I had a feeling that we were running aground And at about that time I heard a record called Accept No Substitute of Delaney and Bonnie, and Leon Russell was playing piano on it. And Chris and I were both, you know, blown away by the guy's piano style. And Denny Cordell said, yeah, I can put you in touch with him. So I dissolved the Grease band. It's a bit upsetting as always. But then I went over to see Leon, and, you know, he had a hell of an ego, Leon. I mean, he always has had.
There was a definitely affinity between them. So we approached Leon, and Chris was obviously around, and we approached Leon to see if he'd help us put this band together.
He was the first guy I heard playing piano that I thought, God, that's how to play a piano, you know. So I always admired him, and to work with him, I was terribly in awe of him.
You got time, but it ain't no best time. Oh, lonely days are gone. I'm coming home now. Oh, my baby, she rolled me. Oh, my baby.
Leon called me, and I called somebody else and got singers together in the band. Some of the players were from Delaney and Bonnie, Jim Keltner.
Well, I believe Leon contacted me for that, and said, Jim Lee, you want to play? And I said, yeah, absolutely, you know, anytime, whatever you want to do. I was a huge Leon fan, and Leon was a great leader.
What are you trying to do? Well, I play guitar and piano, you know, and kind of help arrange the music.
We went to A&M, which was on the old Charlie Chaplin film lot, and there was this large film studio, Studio A, and we started rehearsing there, but in the true Hollywood fashion, sort of the word had got out, and Leon had called more than one drum in case the other drummer couldn't make it. And in no time flat, it turned into, from this 5-piece band, into this huge band.
I think the most vivid picture for me is the morning that we left, when we all gathered together to get on the Cocker Power plane. People brought their children, there was a little dog with us, and it was just a real family. I mean, to see this group get together just with the most loving spirit. It began that way, and it was wonderful. It was so exciting.
And Leon was doing such a fantastic job directing everything, and Joe just sang so fantastic. I mean, we all knew it was really good.
People would go in there on a lunch break and never show up again. This incredible music was coming out of the stage, the sound stage, that was just rattling the place. It was just so powerful and so great.
People talking, trying to break us up. When they know that I love you so. I don't care what the people may say. They'll never let you go.
You know, it's one of those fly by the seat of your pants, a sort of hippie dictum of love, sex, rock and roll. The whole thing was it, and everybody was bonding like mad, or whatever it's called. Anyway, the spirit was absolutely wonderful when it started.
But I could not. You know, I think that along the road, the ego started to enter the picture. Joe didn't seem to have one, which always astounded me because he was the focal point. He was the center of this incredible event that was taking place, and seemed oblivious a lot of the time to the power plays that were going on around him.
When Joe eventually went off to the States, I think it was almost a natural culmination of his development. I think, though, that the Mad Dogs and Englishmen tour, which initially seemed so exciting, gradually began to alarm the family as we began to hear stories about things that were happening over there.
It was not unlike any sort of little, you know, huge amount of people getting together and becoming like a little town of some kind. You know, you're going to have all kinds of stuff going on, you know, and that's what it was like. It just was every kind of thing you could imagine, happening with a lot of people happen. That's all I can say.
One day I went I went down to the lobby, and most of the group was in the lobby lined up to get on a bus. And I said, oh my gosh, have I missed something? Is there a sound check? Are we doing something together? And they said, well, we're going to the doctor to get shots because their VD seems to be running rampant in this band. And thankfully, I hadn't been exposed to any of it. I was staying by myself. But that was one party I was glad I missed.
Leon probably saw this as an opportunity to sort of project his own career. He was very much the other person in the spotlight. And I think he just had a lot of mannerisms that would sort of throw Joe for a loop. You know, they'd come apart in the song, where the song would stop for 4 bars, and then Joe would do something, and the band would come in. Well, the band knew when to come in, but Leon would always insist in the middle of Joe singing by shouting, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the band would come in. And of course, and you'd always see Joe going, what?
Start right where the singing starts. Let's just try the chorus one time. Is the choir all up?
At the end, it was a clash of style and intrusive unto what Joe did best.
You know, people were feeding Joe all sorts of drugs and nasty things, and it got out of hand.
You know, everything started to deteriorate. By the time we'd finished in LA, I fell in a heap. I'd lost all motivation and direction, and I don't know why. It was that strange feeling of it was Joe Cocker and Mad Dogs and Englishmen. You know, it was here I was, still that thing out front, and a lot of people thought that I was a caricature, that Leon was like, you know, pulling the strings to make me dance and all that. So it got very weird towards the end. I don't know if it really made a statement or not, Mad Dogs, because I think the one thing disappointed me about it, we really didn't have much original material. We sort of revamped a lot of old stuff, you know, and I did quite a bit of the songs I'd done with the Grease Band. But yeah, the people, you know, people who actually witnessed it say it was quite something. From my memory, I don't know.
It's gonna get a little bit better.
When he came home, it was difficult to understand what the problem was. I think we all thought that he'd actually been through so many things so quickly that it'd been very difficult for him to cope with. The extent to which drugs were playing a part in his sort of personal disequilibrium was impossible, I think, for any of us to understand, because none of us had ever been involved in drugs at all, didn't know what effect that they had on us, and certainly weren't involved with other people who were involved with them either.
I remember going back to Sheffield and just sort of hovering about. I bought a van and I just drove up and down the country. It was weird. I went up to John O'Groats and then I drove down to Land's End, and it was just slept in this Ford Transit, you know. Strange. I don't know what sort of even propelled me, but maybe I just wanted to get to know what England was a bit like, you know. But the weird thing was I had like a little bag of heroin at the time, I remember.
Where do you go from here? What happens now to Joe Cocker? What are you going to go on and do now?
Well, that's what I'm basically just sat thinking about, you know. I could go back on the road, or what, you know.
What would you like to do?
I'm still not dead sure, you know. I'm just gonna rock on in one way or another.
Well, I was very upset about that, because he was like a zombie when he came back. He used to get up and sit in this room all day and take no interest in anything. And was quite, I don't remember how long, but it was quite a number of months before he gradually pulled round.
I think it probably wiped him out. I think it started a very dark period for him. He sort of vanished after that.
You know, there were times in my life when I could have, kicked myself for just sort of living in the bottle all the time. I know it's like a story, but I just don't really look back on the rough times. I just hope that what's coming up is going to be good.
But just when to begin, I'm there for time. There've been times I found myself thinking of committing some terrible crime. Still, this loneliness won't leave me alone. My love, it's such a drag to be on your own. My God left me, and wouldn't say one. Yes, I'll just break right down and cry. Many rivers to cross.
When Chris asked me to, about a few months after, maybe it's about a year after Mad Dogs, to, go with him with this Chris Stainton All-Stars, it was pretty grueling. We ended up in Australia, and I remember getting arrested there. It was like a great anticlimax to it all.
We arrived in Sydney, and lo and behold, we ran into someone came with a huge bag of grass. Says, smoke some of this, lads, And so we thought, great. We all had a good smoke. And then we moved on to the next town, which was Adelaide. 5 o'clock in the morning in Adelaide, the knock comes on the door, the police, everybody, the whole band, busted.
Next minute, I know I got no shoes on. All I had on was a pair of jeans, and these two burly cops thrust my arms at my back and ran me out of the place and just locked me up for the night in a very strange prison. I was in with a guy who killed an abo, he said. Nothing big, nothing serious. I just killed an abo. So, hey.
And, well, we got taken to court and fined, and that was it, that was the end of that tour, and we left.
And we had a new manager, Nigel Thomas, and who turned out to be he died quite recently. But again, that was the period when I got involved with smack or heroin. I never fixed it up, but I used to snort the stuff. And I gave away like a huge sum of money after that tour.
Nigel did get him on the road with a band and get him working. And Joe seemed at least somewhat on the road back. We were encouraged, so much so as to make a new deal with Joe. And we came up with, I think it was about $400,000. And this was to take care of Joe, get him in good shape. This was for him. And $400,000 may not seem like a lot of money today, but for us it was a lot of money. And we wanted him to have it. And part of the deal I'd also made with Nigel Thomas was that letting him know we were doing this. Plus, as Joe's manager, we were expecting him to certainly stick around and help us bring Joe back. And he gave us every indication that he was ready to do that. And on that basis, we made this advance. We heard just a couple of weeks after that Joe took the $400,000 and in a state that he was in at that time and gave it to Nigel to buy him out of his management agreement. We never heard again from Nigel. And Joe was back being rather withdrawn without a manager again. And they were back, we were back to square one and without the money and without any prospects.
Joe, he seems to be in such a state, and he seems so fed up with life. He's like this, you know, oh, well, we'll just leave him, you know. And he wandered off, and I went home with the wife and kid and started the family, you know.
Until Jim Price came along in 1974, when I was hanging around Shepherd's Bush in London and played me You Are So Beautiful, I mean, I'd really got no ambition or anything. And Jim, bless his heart, he rekindled a bit of, you know, interest in me at that time.
Jim Price was the trumpet player on the Mad Dogs tour, and he and Joe had kept a relationship. He encouraged Joe to come back, and we encouraged them to have him come back. And that's how we got the I Can Stand a Little Rain album, which I think is just a spectacular record. As difficult as it was to make, he was drinking heavily in those days, and he would just be too far gone to finish. And by that time, the tracks were superb, and we'd have to continue to keep bringing things in back and forth. I mean, a song like You Are So Beautiful, which was a hit, big hit for Joe, had a second verse that we never actually got on the record. It has a great second verse, a Billy Preston song, you know, wonderful song. But it was a huge hit for Joe, top 5 record.
Such joy and happiness. You bring such joy and happiness. You bring like a dream, a golden light that shines in the night. Heaven's gift to me. You are so beautiful to me. We love you.
There's a point where the lifestyle can override the work, but there's also a specific area and point where a real artist and a real musician's not going to live by somebody else's morality necessarily. You know, it's like, you know that drugs and alcohol are bad for you? Yeah, you know, as a matter of fact, I'm an adult. I understand the choice. I understand the consequences. But I think it sounds so genuine and it is so interesting is because for a moment it looks like the lifestyle did merge with the expression. That seems like there's a specific point like in the early 70s where that changed, and I guess people sort of realized, wow, maybe we need to cool out and see that, you know, drugs aren't as important as music, but maybe there's room for everything.
Sure, I had some low ebbs. I remember after we did the album I Can Stand a Little Rain, and Jim said, how about doing a showcase for them? And I'd forgotten it had been like how many years? I mean, almost 3 years since I've been on a stage. So I said, okay, we'll do, the idea was to play all the new songs off the album. And I walked out, and I got halfway through the first song, and I just phased. I just didn't know what I was doing up there. They ended up dimming the lights. Mind you, I'd done like a pound of cocaine and a bottle of brandy before I went on, so.
Everybody, I remember Diana Ross sitting there with just tears coming down her face. I mean, it was just a very sad thing to witness, that this guy just was so overcome by what he was doing that he was hurting himself, So it was just back to the drawing board. I mean, we had an artist that you just couldn't sort of count on for sort of, quote, promotional work in a real sense. And in those days, it really affected the records.
I'm feeling good myself, no.
Everybody just did imitations of Joe Cocker that were not very complimentary in those days.
John Belushi did an impersonation of me doing Little Help for My Friends, which had people always, you know, wondering what the hell I must have thought about it. So I ended up doing a Saturday Night Live, and we did Feeling All Right as a duet. But I mean, I'd love to know him as a friend, because he seemed such a sweet guy, you know. And in fact, it was a very good impersonation he did of me.
I've been drinking.
It's like looking at a dear friend and saying, you know, what can I do to help this person? And after a while, you say, well, maybe the best thing I can do is not put my face in front of him too much, you know?
The state of his finances were a mess. He really didn't have any money, and he owed money, and he was basically irresponsible, as a lot of artists are.
Some said I was hopeless.
Chris Blackwell offered me a deal. I got more or less these record deals, which just single album kind of things. But in the middle of doing Sheffield Steel, Joe Sample contacted me, and he said, I've written a song especially for you, Joe. I mean, and I was very touched by it, you know.
That is why I'm still standing here today.
And well, the thing was, I'm down in Nassau, caught up on the album, and they said, you know, they want you on the Grammys, you know. It was so strange. I just sort of walked on there and sang this song, and we got a standing ovation. The audience went berserk, you know, which totally freaked me out.
Won't go away. I'll sing forever. Here in the sunshine, I've lived to see the sun break through the storm, and I'm so glad I'm standing here today.
I was becoming disillusioned with, you know, the powers that make the music business what it is. And that year, the tone of the Grammys was very false and artificial, I felt. And I was sitting alone in my house, feeling blue about my profession. And Joe walks out onto the stage in his day clothes, no tie, no coat, as I recall, in front of the Crusaders. And he sings, I'm so glad I'm standing here today. And at that moment, I screamed out loud, because he stilled everybody and he stirred everybody, and then his song just sliced right through all that pomposity.
Stuart Levine sent me this awful demo, and I went, God, I'm sorry. Not even for the cash, I can't see myself singing this. But Stuart persisted. He said, Joe, I can hear it in my head, you know. Jennifer Warnes, who I knew of Jennifer. And so we actually got in. I went in the one time and did the whole song as a solo, you know, just myself. Then she came in. She tells a whole different story about it, by the way, but I know mine's the right one.